Today is the 8th of September, and this is the 50th time we are talking on the Majjhima Nikaya Suttas. Today we come to Sutta 121, Chulla Sunyata Sutta, the shorter discourse on voidness. Thus have I heard, on one occasion the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in the eastern park, in the palace of Megara's mother. Then when it was evening, the Venerable Ananda rose from meditation, went to the Blessed One, and after paying homage to him, he sat down at one side and said to the Blessed One, "Venerable Sir, on one occasion the Blessed One was living in the Sakyan country at a town of the Sakyans named Nagaraka. There, Venerable Sir, I heard and learned this from the Blessed One's own lips. Now, Ananda, I often abide in voidness. Did I hear that correctly, Venerable Sir? Did I learn that correctly, attend to that correctly, remember that correctly?" "Certainly, Ananda, you heard that correctly, learned that correctly, attended to that correctly, remembered that correctly. As formerly, Ananda, so now too I often abide in voidness." "Ananda, just as this palace of Megara's mother is void of elephants, cattle, horses and mares, void of gold and silver, void of the assembly of men and women, and there is present only this non-voidness, namely the singleness dependent on the Sangha of monks, so too a monk, not attending to the perception of village, not attending to the perception of people, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of forest. His mind enters into that perception of forest and acquires confidence, steadiness and decision. He understands thus, whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of village, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances that might be dependent on the perception of people, these are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of forest." He understands, this field of perception is void of the perception of village. This field of perception is void of the perception of people. There is present only this non-voidness, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of forest. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there. But as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus. This is present. Thus, Ananda, this is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. Stop here for a moment. So here the Buddha says that when a monk is in the forest monastery, here this place is called the Eastern Park, and that monastery is devoid of a lot of people, devoid of elephants, cattle, horses, money, etc. And there's only the Sangha of monks and the perception of the forest. This is called Kaya Viveka, body seclusion. Viveka means seclusion. Bodily seclusion is to be secluded from people generally. So the Buddha encourages a monk to practice Kaya Viveka by living in secluded places. Secluded places are called aranya. Might be a forest, might be up a hill, might be in a cave, etc. Again, Ananda, a monk, not attending to the perception of people, not attending to the perception of forests, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of earth. His mind enters into that perception of earth and acquires confidence, steadiness and decision. Just as a bull's hide becomes free from foals when fully stretched with 100 pegs, so too a monk, not attending to any of the ridges and hollows of this earth, to the rivers and ravines, the tracks of stumps and thorns, the mountains and uneven places, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of earth. His mind enters into that perception of earth and acquires confidence, steadiness, and decision. He understands thus, whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of people, these are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of forests, these are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of earth. He understands this field of perception is void of the perception of people. This field of perception is void of the perception of forests. There is present only this non-voidness, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of earth. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there. But as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus, this is present. Thus Ananda, this too is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. Stop here for a moment. So here, I think the Buddha is talking about meditation on the earth, meditation on the object of the earth. This is one of the Kasina meditations which existed even before the Buddha's time. What the Visuddhimagga says is that they take this earth, which is a bit like clay, they make it into a round dish, and it has to be of the right color, slightly orange like that. And then this dish, at least I think 1 foot in diameter. Then they look at it and then they close their eyes. And then they look at it and close their eyes. Keep looking and closing their eyes until the sight of earth stays in their mind. So when he can see only earth, then his mind goes into that earth object, and he does not perceive other things. And this meditation can bring them to the jhanas, the 4 jhanas. And so this can be considered the citta viveka, where he's only looking into his mind, not aware of his surroundings. Citta viveka is mental seclusion. Mental seclusion is a higher state of seclusion than just now the bodily seclusion, kaya viveka. And both of these are encouraged by the Buddha. Again, Ananda, a monk not attending to the perception of forests, not attending to the perception of earth, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of infinite space. His mind enters into that perception of the base of infinite space and acquires confidence, steadiness, and decision. He understands thus, whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of forests, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of earth, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of infinite space. He understands this field of perception is void of the perception of forests. This field of perception is void of the perception of earth. There is present only this non-voidness, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of infinite space. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there. But as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus, this is present. Thus Ananda, this too is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. Stop here for a moment. So here, this monk, he attains the arupa, the first arupa, which is the base of infinite space. So he's only aware, he only perceives the base of infinite space and nothing else. Again, Ananda, a monk not attending to the perception of earth, not attending to the perception of the base of infinite space, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of infinite consciousness. His mind enters into that perception of the base of infinite consciousness and acquires confidence, steadiness, and decision. He understands thus, whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of earth, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of infinite space, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of infinite consciousness. He understands this field of perception is void of the perception of earth. This field of perception is void of the perception of the base of infinite space. There is present only this non-voidness, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of infinite consciousness. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there. But as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus, this is present, thus Ananda, this too is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. So in the same way, his meditation goes to a higher level and he attains the base of infinite consciousness, and he's only aware of that. He does not perceive any other thing. Again, Ananda, a monk, not attending to the perception of the base of infinite space, not attending to the perception of the base of infinite consciousness, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of nothingness. His mind enters into that perception of the base of nothingness and acquires confidence, steadiness, and decision. He understands thus, whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of infinite space, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of infinite consciousness, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of nothingness. He understands this field of perception is void of the perception of the base of infinite space. This field of perception is void of the perception of the base of infinite consciousness. There is present only this non-voidness, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of nothingness. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there. But as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus. This is present, thus Ananda. This too is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. So similarly, he goes to the next higher level of meditation, which is the base of infinite, which is the base of nothingness. Again, Ananda, a monk, not attending to the perception of the base of infinite consciousness, not attending to the perception of the base of nothingness, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception. His mind enters into that perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception and acquires confidence, steadiness, and decision. He understands thus, whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of infinite consciousness, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of nothingness, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception. He understands this field of perception is void of the perception of the base of infinite consciousness. This field of perception is void of the perception of the base of nothingness. There is present only this non-voidness, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there. But as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus. This is present, thus Ananda. This too is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. Stop here for a moment. So here he comes to the base of neither perception nor non-perception. This is the highest arupa or arupa jhana he can attain, where the mind is slipping into. Sometimes it perceives, sometimes it does not perceive. Again, Ananda, a monk, not attending to the perception of the base of nothingness, not attending to the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception, attends to the singleness dependent on the signless concentration of mind. His mind enters into that signless concentration of mind and acquires confidence, steadiness, and decision. He understands thus, whatever disturbances that might be dependent on the perception of the base of nothingness, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely that connected with the 6 bases that are dependent on this body and conditioned by life. he understands this field of perception is void of the perception of the base of nothingness. This field of perception is void of the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception. There is present only this non-voidness, namely that connected with the 6 bases that are dependent on this body and conditioned by life. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, but as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus. This is present, thus Ananda. This too is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. Stop here for a moment. This signless concentration of mind is evident that it's a very high state. The Pali is Animita Ceto Samadhi. This nimitta is translated as the sign, the sign. So animita is signless, signless concentration of mind. The highest arupa is the base of neither perception nor non-perception, where the mind sometimes perceives, sometimes does not perceive. And this one is supposed to be higher. But in the suttas we find generally the next higher stage than this is the cessation of perception and feeling. That state of cessation of perception and feeling, there is no perception, there is no feeling, there is no consciousness. So when that monk enters that state, he has no awareness because the 6 sense consciousness has stopped. But even then, it seems because this state is similar to the state of parinibbana, it seems there is an awareness, there is a consciousness which is not normal consciousness, and that consciousness is luminous, is stated in the Kevada Sutta and the Digha Nikaya. It is also boundless. The state of parinibbana, that consciousness is boundless, is bright and luminous. So when the monk is in that state, he is not aware because he does not perceive. But when he comes out of it, then he is aware that he was in that state. So here it might be referring to that state, because normal consciousness must have an object. The normal 6 consciousness must have an object, which is a sign, must have a sign or object. But in this signless concentration, there is no sign, no object. So it is not the normal 6 consciousness. Again, Ananda, a monk not attending to the perception of the base of nothingness, not attending to the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception, attends to the singleness dependent on the signless concentration of mind. His mind enters into that signless concentration of mind and acquires confidence, steadiness and decision. He understands thus, this signless concentration of mind is conditioned and volitionally produced, but whatever is conditioned and volitionally produced is impermanent, subject to cessation. When he knows and sees thus, his mind is liberated from the taint of sensual desire, from the taint of being and from the taint of ignorance. When it is liberated, there comes the knowledge, it is liberated. He understands birth is destroyed, the holy life has been lived, what had to be done has been done. There is no more coming to any state of being. Stop here for a moment. This is what happens, it is mentioned in other suttas. When a monk attains the cessation of perception and feeling, and when he comes out of it, he realizes that the whole world is conditioned, produced by the mind. So when he comes out of that state, he attains destruction of the taints. He becomes liberated. So here it says that state of cessation of perception and feeling can last a maximum of 7 days. Like when the Buddha, after the Buddha was liberated, he sat under the tree and attained that state for 7 days and 7 nights. Then after that, he came out of that state. Then he walked to another tree, sat down another tree, and also went into that cessation of perception and feeling for 7 days and 7 nights. So that state is conditioned after 7 days you must come out of it. It's not a permanent state. Okay, come to paragraph 12. He understands thus, whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the taint of sensual desire, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the taint of being, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the taint of ignorance, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely that connected with the 6 bases that are dependent on this body and conditioned by life. He understands this field of perception is void of the taint of sensual desire. This field of perception is void of the taint of being. This field of perception is void of the taint of ignorance. There is present only this non-voidness, namely that connected with the 6 bases that are dependent on this body and conditioned by life. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there. But as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus. This is present. Thus Ananda, this is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness, supreme and unsurpassed. Ananda, whatever recluses and Brahmins in the past entered upon and abided in pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness, all entered upon and abided in this same pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness. Whatever recluses and Brahmins in the future will enter upon and abide in pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness, all will enter upon and abide in this pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness. Whatever recluses and Brahmins in the present enter upon and abide in pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness, all enter upon and abide in this same pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness. Therefore, Ananda, you should train thus. You will enter upon and abide in pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness. That is what the Blessed One said. The Venerable Ananda was satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. So in this last part, the Buddha talks about that state, that's signless concentration of mind after liberation. After liberation, the taint of sensual desire, the ignorance, and what's the other one here? Sensual desire, being and ignorance are not present because he has become liberated. So the taints, the asavas have been destroyed. So when he enters this state, this signless concentration, which I presume is the cessation of perception and feeling, then the difference is this, that the asavas have been destroyed in the last part. So this is the highest state. So the Buddha calls it the pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness. So this sutta is about voidness. It's a bit deep. So I think nowadays I can hardly find any monk or any ascetic who can attain this state of the signless concentration. So without an arahant around to explain this, it's we can only make a guess. Okay, now we come to the next sutta, 122, Maha Sunyata Sutta, the greater discourse on voidness. This one is a very important sutta. It's very important from the Dhamma point of view. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living in the Sakyan country at Kapilavatu in Groda's park. Then when it was morning, the Blessed One dressed, and taking his bowl and outer robe, went into Kapilavatu for alms. When he had wandered for alms in Kapilavatu, and had returned from his alms round, after his meal he went for his daytime abiding to the dwelling of Kala Kemaka the Sakyan. Now on that occasion there were many resting places prepared in Kala Kemaka the Sakyan's dwelling. When the Blessed One saw this, he thought, there are many resting places prepared in Kala Kemaka, the Sakyan's dwelling. Do many monks live here? Now on that occasion, the Venerable Ananda along with many monks, was busy making robes at Gata, the Sakyan's dwelling. Then when it was evening, the Blessed One rose from retreat and went to Gata, the Sakyan's dwelling. There he sat down on a seat made ready and asked the Venerable Ananda, Ananda, there are many resting places prepared in Kala Kemaka, the Sakyan's dwelling. Do many monks live there? Venerable Sir, many resting places have been prepared in Kala Kemaka, the Sakyan's dwelling. Many monks are living there. This is our time for making robes, Venerable Sir. Stop here for a moment. This time for making robes is the last month of the rain season. I mentioned last night that in India, the rain season is four months. So the first 3 months, the monks have to stay in one place for the rains retreat. And after the 3 months, the last month, they are allowed to make robes because the Buddha allowed them only once a year to make robes because the Buddha didn't want them to spend too much time looking for cloth to make robes and all that. So that one month they are busy making robes. This is the time. And the Buddha said, Ananda, a monk does not shine by delighting in company, by taking delight in company, by devoting himself to delight in company, by delighting in society, by taking delight in society, by rejoicing in society. Indeed, Ananda, it is not possible that a monk who delights in company, takes delight in company, and devotes himself to delight in company, who delights in society, takes delight in society, and rejoices in society, will ever obtain at will, without trouble or difficulty, the bliss of renunciation, the bliss of seclusion, the bliss of peace, the bliss of enlightenment. But it can be expected that when a monk lives alone, withdrawn from society, he will obtain at will, without trouble or difficulty, the bliss of renunciation, the bliss of seclusion, the bliss of peace, the bliss of enlightenment. Indeed, Ananda, it is not possible that a monk who delights in company, takes delight in company, and devotes himself to delight in company, who delights in society, takes delight in society, and rejoices in society, will ever enter upon and abide in either the liberation by mind, in either the liberation of mind that is temporary and delectable, or in the liberation of mind that is perpetual and unshakable. But it can be expected that when a monk lives alone, withdrawn from society, he will enter upon and abide in the liberation of mind that is temporary and delectable, or in the liberation of mind that is perpetual and unshakable. Stop here for a moment. So here you can see when the Buddha found out that there were many monks staying in one dwelling, this Kala Kemaka's dwelling must be a very big kuti, very big building where many monks can stay. So the Buddha was not happy. The Buddha says, if monks delight in company, delight in society, it is not possible to obtain the bliss of renunciation, the bliss of seclusion, the bliss of peace, the bliss of enlightenment. This refers to the jhanas, states of meditative absorption, which are absolutely necessary for enlightenment, the steps to enlightenment. So also in the paragraph 4, the Buddha says, if a monk delights in company and rejoices in society, he cannot obtain the liberation of mind that is temporary and delectable. This liberation of mind that is temporary and delectable probably refers to the jhanas. And then, or the liberation of mind that is perpetual and unshakable. This probably refers to the parts and fruits, the Aryan stages of parts and fruits, because the Aryan stages are perpetual, and you cannot, once you have attained it, you cannot fall out of those states, so they are perpetual, unshakable. So the liberation of mind that is temporary are the jhanas, and the liberation of mind that is perpetual are the parts and fruits, the Aryan stages. So you see here the Buddha stresses very much on solitary living for a monk, because the Buddha says here, it's obvious that only by living alone a monk can attain the various stages. Although it is, although there are exceptions, but generally, if a monk wants to attain liberation, then it is important to stay alone. And this is very different from the Mahayana teachings. In the Mahayana Bodhisattva precepts, it is not allowed for a monk to live alone, especially in the forest. He has to associate with society. And then you have sutras like the Vimalakirti Sutra, where they say the Bodhisattva Vimalakirti has attained such a high state that he has surpassed the Arahant Sariputta. And he likes to always mix with high society and take delight in company and society. So here you can see from the Buddha Sutta that it is not possible for such a person to even attain any jhana, not to talk about the Aryan stages. Now I come to paragraph 5. I do not see even a single kind of form, Ananda, from the change and alteration of which there would not arise sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair in one who lusts for it and takes delight in it. However, Ananda, there is this abiding discovered by the Tathagata to enter and abide in voidness internally by giving no attention to all signs. If while the Tathagata is abiding thus, he is visited by monks or nuns, by men or women lay followers, by kings or kings' ministers, by other sectarians or their disciples, then with the mind leaning to seclusion, tending and inclining to seclusion, withdrawn, delighting in renunciation, and altogether done with things that are the basis for taints, he invariably talks to them in a way concerned with dismissing them. Stop here for a moment. So the Buddha says there is no single form that if we lust for it and take delight in it, that it would not cause sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair to arise in us when any change occurs in that form. In other words, if we love any person, we are attached to any person, and when something happens to that person, it is inevitable that sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair would arise in us. So that's why the Buddha says, be very careful. If you don't want to suffer, don't be too attached. Then the Buddha says that the Buddha, he enters into this signless concentration of mind, this presumably the state of the cessation of perception and feeling, which the Buddha can easily enter into. So when he enters that state, the mind inclines to seclusion, and the mind tends to withdraw. It goes into that state of utter serenity and great bliss. So when somebody comes to talk to him, he will talk in such a way so that they know that he wants to dismiss them. So they'll have to make the talk as short as possible. There are some people, when they come to talk with a monk, they like to spend a lot of time talking. But if the monk is interested in meditation, he doesn't want to talk a lot. So he wants to dismiss that person. So whatever monks can attain high states of tranquility, they like to spend a lot of time in those states, and they don't like to associate with people a lot. They tend to be aloof from society. Therefore, Ananda, if a monk should wish, may I enter upon and abide in voidness internally, he should steady his mind internally, quiet it, bring it to singleness and concentrate it And how does he steady his mind internally, quiet it, bring it to singleness and concentrate it? Here Ananda, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states. A monk enters upon and abides in the first jhana, and similarly second jhana, third jhana, and fourth jhana. That is how a monk steadies his mind internally, quiets it, brings it to singleness and concentrates it. Then he gives attention to voidness internally. While he is giving attention to voidness internally, his mind does not enter into voidness internally or acquire confidence, steadiness and decision. When that is so, he understands thus, while I am giving attention to voidness internally, my mind does not enter into voidness internally or acquire confidence, steadiness and decision. In this way, he has full awareness of that. He gives attention to voidness externally. He gives attention to voidness internally and externally. He gives attention to imperturbability. While he is giving attention to imperturbability, his mind does not enter into imperturbability or acquire confidence, steadiness and decision. When that is so, he understands thus, while I am giving attention to imperturbability, my mind does not enter into imperturbability or acquire confidence, steadiness and decision. In this way, he has full awareness of that. Then that monk should steady his mind internally, quiet it, bring it to singleness and concentrate it on that same sign of concentration as before. Then he gives attention to voidness internally. While he is giving attention to voidness internally, his mind enters into voidness internally and acquires confidence, steadiness and decision. When that is so, he understands thus, while I am giving attention to voidness internally, my mind enters into voidness internally and acquires confidence, steadiness and decision. In this way, he has full awareness of that. He gives attention to voidness externally. He gives attention to voidness internally and externally. He gives attention to imperturbability. While he is giving attention to imperturbability, his mind enters into imperturbability and acquires confidence, steadiness and decision. When that is so, he understands thus, while I am giving attention to imperturbability, my mind enters into imperturbability and acquires confidence, steadiness and decision. In this way, he has full awareness of that. Stop here for a moment. So here, the Buddha says, for a monk to enter for a monk to steady his mind internally, quiet it and bring it to singleness and concentrate it, he has to attain the 4 jhanas. And to attain the 4 jhanas, different monks will have different objects of meditation. What the Buddha uses is anapanasati, mindfulness of the breath. Then the Buddha says, if a monk tries to attain to give attention to voidness internally, but his mind does not enter into that voidness internally, and then he should try to contemplate on voidness externally, and if that is not successful, then he should try both internally and externally, and then after that try imperturbability. This imperturbability refers to the 4th jhana and above, the state of tranquility, which is such a high state. Then the Buddha says, if he cannot do that, then he must go back to entering the jhanas, the 4 jhanas, and attain up to the 4th jhana. Then after he has attained the 4th jhana, the mind becomes very tranquil. And then at that point, then having come out of the 4th jhana, then he should give attention to voidness internally. Then he should be able to enter into it. And also all the others, externally, internally and externally, and the sign of imperturbability. Then this giving attention to voidness internally is mentioned in paragraph 6. That means by giving no attention to all signs, not giving attention to any sign, just to enter into his mind. Okay, now we come to paragraph 11. When a monk abides thus, if his mind inclines to walking, he walks thinking, while I am walking thus, no evil, unwholesome states of covetousness and grief will beset me. In this way, he has full awareness of that. And when the monk abides thus, if his mind inclines to standing, he stands. If his mind inclines to sitting, he sits. If his mind inclines to lying down, he lies down, thinking, while I am lying down, thus no evil, unwholesome states will beset me. In this way, he has full awareness of that. When a monk abides thus, if his mind inclines to talking, I'll stop here for a moment. So here, if this monk can give attention after attaining the 4 jhanas, if he can give attention to the voidness internally, externally, and imperturbability, and enter into it, then when he comes out of it, if he's walking or standing or sitting or lying down, then he says, the Buddha says, no evil, unwholesome states of covetousness and grief will beset me. This covetousness and grief arises from craving for sensual objects. Craving for sensual objects, then you have covetousness arising. If you are still caught up with sensual desire, then you have covetousness. But if you cannot get what you want, then grief will arise. So covetousness and grief comes from sensual desire, desire for sense objects, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and thoughts. So he has attained those states, those high states where he can enter into voidness or imperturbability. Then these covetousness and grief will not beset him. He's no more interested in sense objects. When a monk abides thus, if his mind inclines to talking, he resolves such talk as is low, vulgar, coarse, ignoble, unbeneficial, and which does not lead to disenchantment, dispassion, cessation, peace, direct knowledge, enlightenment, and nibbana. That is, talk of kings, robbers, ministers, armies, dangers, battles, food, drink, clothing, beds, garlands, perfumes, relatives, vehicles, villages, towns, cities, countries, women, heroes, streets, wells, the dead, trivialities, the origin of the world, the origin of the sea, whether things are so or are not so. Such talk I shall not utter. In this way he has full awareness of that. But he resolves such talk as deals with effacement, as favors the mind's release, and which leads to complete disenchantment, dispassion, cessation, peace, direct knowledge, enlightenment, and nibbana. That is, talk on wanting little, on contentment. Wanting little is also translated as few wants. On contentment, seclusion, aloofness from society, arousing energy, virtue or moral conduct, concentration, wisdom, deliverance or liberation, knowledge and vision of deliverance. Such talk I shall utter. In this way he has full awareness of that. I'll stop here for a moment. So here the Buddha says, if the monk abides in these states of these deep states of tranquility, then he will not engage in base talk. This such talk as is low is tirachana kata, literally translated as animal talk, worldly talk. But he will only talk what concerns the Dhamma. When a monk abides thus, if his mind inclines to thinking, he resolves such thoughts as are low, vulgar, coarse, ignoble, unbeneficial, and which do not lead to disenchantment, dispassion, cessation, peace, direct knowledge, enlightenment, and nibbana. That is, thoughts of sensual desire, thoughts of ill will, and thoughts of cruelty. Such thoughts I shall not think. In this way he has full awareness of that. But he resolves such thoughts as are noble and emancipating, and lead the one who practices in accordance with them to the complete destruction of suffering. That is, thoughts of renunciation, thoughts of non-ill will, and thoughts of non-cruelty. Such thoughts I shall think. In this way he has full awareness of that. Stop here for a moment. So here also the Buddha says that this monk, he will be aware of his thoughts. He only think right thoughts, not wrong thoughts. Ananda, there are these 5 chords of sensual pleasure. What 5? Forms cognizable by the eye that are wished for, desired, agreeable and likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. Sounds cognizable by the ear, odors cognizable by the nose, flavors cognizable by the tongue, tangibles cognizable by the body that are wished for, desired, agreeable and likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. These are the 5 chords of sensual pleasure. Herein a monk should constantly review his own mind thus. Does any mental excitement concerning these 5 chords of sensual pleasure ever arise in me on any occasion? If on reviewing his mind the monk understands, mental excitement concerning these 5 chords of sensual pleasure does arise in me on certain occasions, then he understands, desire and lust for the 5 chords of sensual pleasure are unabandoned in me. In this way he has full awareness of that. But if on reviewing his mind the monk understands, no mental excitement concerning these 5 chords of sensual pleasure arises in me on any occasion, then he understands, desire and lust for the 5 chords of sensual pleasure are abandoned in me. In this way he has full awareness of that. Stop here for a moment. So here the Buddha says a monk should examine his own mind and see whether he has any desire and lust for sight, sounds, smells, taste and touch. Unless a monk ascertains jhana and constantly abides in jhana, otherwise he would still have this desire and lust for the 5 chords of sensual pleasure. So not simply any monk can get rid of desire and lust for the 5 chords of sensual pleasure. Only the monk who constantly abides in jhana, in which case he will be not interested to see, to hear and all that. He's not interested. He won't direct his senses to the sense objects. He will abide internally most of the time. Ananda, there are these 5 aggregates affected by clinging, in regard to which a monk should abide contemplating rise and fall thus. Such is material form or body, such its arising, such its disappearance, such is feeling, such its arising, such is disappearance, such is perception, such its arising, such is disappearance, such is volition, such is arising, such is disappearance, such is consciousness, such is arising, such is disappearance. When he abides contemplating rise and fall in these 5 aggregates of attachment, the conceit I am based on these 5 aggregates of attachment are abandoned in him. When that is so, the monk understands the conceit I am based on these 5 aggregates of attachment is abandoned in me. In that way he has full awareness of that. These states have an entirely wholesome basis. They are noble, supramundane and inaccessible to the evil one. So here the Buddha says to get rid of the conceit I am, which is very difficult to do, that only the Arahant can get rid of the conceit I am. The Buddha says we should constantly contemplate the 5 aggregates of attachment which we take to be I or mine, or I am in the 5 aggregates, or the 5 aggregates are in me. So constantly we should see the impermanence of the body, feeling, perception, volition and consciousness, or body and mind. What do you think, Ananda? What good does a disciple see that he should seek the teacher's company even if he is told to go away? Venerable Sir, our teachings are rooted in the Blessed One, guided by the Blessed One, have the Blessed One as their resort. It would be good if the Blessed One would explain the meaning of these words. Having heard it from the Blessed One, the monks will remember it. Ananda, a disciple should not seek the teacher's company for the sake of discourses, stanzas and expositions. Why is that? For a long time, Ananda, you have learned the teachings, remembered them, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. But such talk as deals with effacement, as favors the mind's release, and which leads to complete disenchantment, dispassion, cessation, peace, direct knowledge and enlightenment, and nibbana, that is, talk on wanting little, on contentment, seclusion, aloofness from society, arousing energy, virtue, concentration, wisdom, liberation, knowledge and vision of liberation. For the sake of such talk, a disciple should seek the teacher's company even if he is told to go away. I stop here for a moment. So at this point of time, I think the Buddha had already taught a lot of suttas to the monks. And the Buddha says they are already very familiar with the teachings, that is the suttas. They have recited them verbally, examined them and understood them. But the Buddha says that talk which is concerning having few ones on contentment, seclusion, aloofness from society, arousing, energetic effort, moral conduct, concentration, wisdom, liberation, knowledge and vision of liberation. For such talk, a disciple should seek advice from the teacher, even if he is told to go away. So these topics of talk are very important. Since this is so, Ananda, a teacher's undoing may come about, a pupil's undoing may come about, and the undoing of one who lives the holy life may come about. And how does a teacher's undoing come about? Here, some teacher resorts to a secluded resting place, the forest, the root of a tree, a mountain, a ravine, a hillside cave, a charnel ground, a jungle thicket, an open space, a heap of straw. While he lives thus withdrawn, Brahmins and householders from town and country visit him, and as a result he goes astray, becomes filled with desire, succumbs to craving, and reverts to luxury. This teacher is said to be undone by the teacher's undoing. He has been struck down by evil, unwholesome states that defile, bring renewal of being, give trouble, ripen in suffering, and lead to future birth, aging, and death. That is how the teacher's undoing comes about. And how does a pupil's undoing come about? A pupil of that teacher, emulating the teacher's seclusion, resorts to a secluded resting place, the forest, the root of a tree, a mountain, ravine, hillside cave, etc. While he lives thus withdrawn, Brahmins and householders from town and country visit him, and as a result he goes astray, becomes filled with desire, succumbs to craving, and reverts to luxury. This pupil is said to be undone by the pupil's undoing. He has been struck down by evil, unwholesome states that defile, bring renewal of being, give trouble, ripen in suffering, and lead to future birth, aging, and death. This is how the pupil's undoing comes about. Stop here for a moment. Here the Buddha is talking about a teacher and the pupil who goes to a secluded place to practice. But maybe because they become famous and a lot of people come to visit them and bring offerings and all that. So they get a lot of offerings, they get become famous. And then they go astray. It's very easy to go astray, especially when a monk becomes famous. So this is said to be a teacher's undoing and a pupil's undoing. These two refers to external ascetics, not to the Buddha's disciples. And this, as a result of this, they will continue on the round of samsara, the round of rebirths, and also they will suffer, having been overcome by name and fame and offerings and all that. And how does the undoing of one who lives the holy life come about? Here Tathagata appears in the world, Arahant Sammasambuddha, perfect in true knowledge and conduct, sublime, knower of worlds, incomparable leader of persons to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, enlightened, blessed. He resorts to a secluded resting place, the forest, etc. While he lives thus withdrawn, Brahmins and householders from town and country visit him. Yet He does not go astray or become filled with desire, succumb to craving and revert to luxury. But a disciple of this teacher, emulating his teacher's seclusion, resorts to a secluded resting place, the forest, the root of a tree, a mountain, etc. While he lives thus withdrawn, Brahmins and householders from town and country visit him, and as a result he goes astray, becomes filled with desire, succumbs to craving, and reverts to luxury. This one who lives the holy life is said to be undone by the undoing of one who lives the holy life. He has been struck down by evil, unwholesome states that defile, bring renewal of being, give trouble, ripen in suffering, and lead to future birth, aging, and death. Thus there comes to be the undoing of one who leads the holy life. And herein, Ananda, the undoing of one who leads the holy life has a more painful result, a more bitter result than the teacher's undoing, or the pupil's undoing, and it even leads to perdition. Stop here for a moment. So here, the Buddha is talking about a Buddhist monk, a disciple of the Buddha, the Tathagata. And here he is said to be the one who leads the holy life. Whereas the earlier when the Buddha talked about the teacher and the pupil, he does not say that they lead the holy life, because the real holy life is the path taught by the Buddha, the path that leads out of the round of rebirths. That's why the real holy life is to be found in the Noble Eightfold Path. And the Buddha says, one who has already come to the Noble Eightfold Path, if you go astray, and then the result is much more bitter than an external ascetic. It can even lead to hell, because the teaching is so good. Our teacher is so good, the Buddha, and so when we inherit something that is so good, and we go the wrong way, then we have to pay much more than somebody who follows an external teacher. Therefore, Ananda, behave towards me with friendliness, not with hostility. That will lead... stop here for a moment. So this one set me a thinking. It's not only for monks, even for lay people. Lay people, you have come to the Buddha's teachings, which is so perfect, utterly pure. You don't make use of it. When you pass away, you're going to regret very much. You're going to realize such a valuable thing has come into your hands, and you just threw it away. And you will have much more remorse than if you, for example, if you followed an external teaching, and the teaching is not worth much. If you threw it away, you don't regret very much. But if you have come into such a perfect teaching as the Buddha's Dhamma, and you don't make use of it, that amounts to throwing it away. So when you, at the end of your life, you will regret extreme, terribly, not only for a monk, also for lay people. Therefore, Ananda, behave towards me with friendliness, not with hostility. That will lead to your welfare and happiness for a long time. And how do disciples behave towards the teacher with hostility, not with friendliness? Here, Ananda, compassionate and seeking their welfare, the teacher teaches the Dhamma to the disciples out of compassion. This is for your welfare, this is for your happiness. His disciples do not want to hear or give ear or exert their minds to understand. They err and turn aside from the teacher's dispensation or teaching. Thus do disciples behave towards the teacher with hostility, not with friendliness? And how do disciples behave towards the teacher with friendliness, not with hostility? Here, Ananda, compassionate and seeking their welfare, the teacher, that means the Buddha, teaches the Dhamma to the disciples out of compassion. This is for your welfare, this is for your happiness. His disciples want to hear and give ear and exert their minds to understand. They do not err and turn aside from the teacher's dispensation. Thus do disciples behave towards the teacher with friendliness, not with hostility. Therefore, Ananda, behave towards me with friendliness, not with hostility. That will lead to your welfare and happiness for a long time. I shall not treat you as the potter treats the raw damp clay. Repeatedly restraining you, I shall speak to you, Ananda. Repeatedly admonishing you, I shall speak to you, Ananda. The sound call will stand the test. That is what the Blessed One said. Remember, Ananda was satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. This part, last part, now I'd like to elaborate a bit now. Here the Buddha says that we should behave with friendliness towards the Buddha. That is by hearing what the Buddha says in his discourses, and give ear and exert the mind to understand what the Buddha is trying to teach us. And if we don't pay attention to the Buddha's teachings and try to understand, then we are behaving with hostility towards the Buddha. Actually, many people have come to the Dhamma and they don't study the Buddha's words well enough. They don't know that there are certain suttas, like in the Nikaya, Sutta 29, where the Buddha says that his teachings, his suttas are complete and perfect and utterly pure. There is no other teaching so perfect, so pure as the Buddha's teachings. And the Buddha says, if you want to add to his teachings, you don't understand his Dhamma. If you want to subtract from his teachings, also you don't understand his Dhamma. In other words, we should stay only to the original discourses of the Buddha found in the 4 Nikayas and 6 books of the Khuddaka Nikaya, the 5th Nikaya, the original teachings of the Buddha. Unfortunately, nowadays there are additional teachings to be found which are not the Buddha's words. We know, for example, the Abhidhamma, the commentaries, later books like the Visuddhimagga, later sutras like the Mahayana Sutras and all this. And the Buddha has warned in the Samyutta Nikaya 20.7 that in time to come, the disciples, that means the Buddhist monks, will not want to listen to the Buddha's words. Instead, they want to listen to the words of disciples. The word of the disciples refers to later monks who wrote the Abhidhamma, later monks who wrote the commentaries, later monks who wrote the Visuddhimagga, who wrote the Mahayana Sutras and all that. So the Buddha has already warned us not to listen to those teachings, but to only keep to his original suttas. So if we don't want to investigate the Buddha's original suttas and understand them, then we are behaving with hostility towards the Buddha. So it's very important to study suttas like this and to behave towards the Buddha with friendliness by investigating his original suttas and trying to understand his original suttas and not later writings of other monks. So this sutta is a very important sutta, Maha Sunyata Sutta, Greater Discourse on Voidness. To recap, the first part, the Buddha says, a monk does not shine by delighting in company, by delighting in society. So the Buddha obviously encourages monks to live alone, because the Buddha says only by living alone a monk can attain the bliss of renunciation, the bliss of seclusion, the bliss of peace, the bliss of enlightenment, namely the jhanas. And also one who takes delight in company and in society will never be able to obtain liberation of mind that is temporary, that is the jhanas, or liberation of mind that is perpetual and unshakable, the various Aryan stages, the paths and the fruits. So it is obvious from here that solitary living for a monk is very important if he wants to get out of samsara. Then the Buddha says that if he inclines his mind towards the signless concentration of mind, voidness, then if people come to talk with him, he invariably talks in such a way as to dismiss them. So he doesn't encourage too much talking. And then the Buddha says a monk should engage in talk that only deals with effacement, talk on wanting little, on contentment, seclusion, aloofness from society, arousing energy, virtue, concentration, wisdom, liberation, knowledge and vision of liberation, and not to engage in worldly talk. And then the Buddha also said to constantly review the mind, whether the mind is excited by the five chords of sensual pleasure, and if the mind is excited by five chords of sensual pleasure, then the monk should make more effort to attain the bliss of seclusion, the bliss of renunciation, so that he goes into his mind rather than outwards into the worldly pleasures. And also the Buddha says to abandon the conceit I am is very important, to see impermanence in the five aggregates, which are also the body and the mind. Constantly to see impermanence in the body and the mind, and slowly we will cut the conceit I am. And then the Buddha also warns that once a monk has come into the Dhamma, and if he goes astray, it's very dangerous for a monk who wears the robe to go astray. It can even lead him to hell. And then lastly, the Buddha says that we should behave with friendliness to the Buddha by trying to understand his words in the original teachings. And then the Buddha says that Ananda, I shall not treat you as the potter treats the raw damp clay. In other words, I won't treat you as something very delicate. The Buddha says he constantly admonishes his disciples. The sound core will stand. So actually a lot of people don't know the Dhamma. They think showing compassion means to be to speak kind words to the disciple all the time. You find this is not what happens with the Buddha. The Buddha sometimes, when the disciples do something wrong, he will scold them. He call them foolish men, and so that's the way the Buddha says that. Actually, that is compassionate. That's a real compassion. And a disciple needs to be scolded. The teacher should scold the disciple so that he'll wake up. Otherwise, he won't wake up. Okay, anything to discuss?
Just that last bit, in that last sutta, where it says 27, Ananda, the sound core will stand the test. Is that saying that the teaching from sound, like talking?
No. What it means is those genuine disciples will withstand all that scolding. Those genuine monks, because sometimes the Buddha talks about genuine monks and fraud monks.
About the disciples, for modern-day disciples like now, when like most of the lay disciples, they don't go to one teacher like day by day. So I find that most very few disciples will stick to a teacher, and the teacher will admonish them like a teacher.
Yes. Because there are a lot of monks who like to be popular. So sometimes they know what is the real Dhamma, what is not the real Dhamma. but they dare not speak out because they want to have a lot of disciples, they want to have a lot of supporters, they want to be popular, they want to be famous, so they dare not speak out. They tend to speak words which people like to listen. Sometimes they even say that their disciples have attained various stages of attainment and all these things. But that is not the Buddha's way. The Buddha, in the suttas you find the Buddha says, if it is white, we should say it is white. If it is black, we should say it is black. We should speak the truth. No fear or favor.
About the various stages of jhanas, I think we talked about now with the first view, it is nice to really attain up to the standards concentration. There is a discussion on the internet that talks about the two-way liberation and liberation by wisdom, and this Imam explains on the internet that the liberation by wisdom, the Arahant only attains 4 jhanas. How does this come about? Whereas we talk about the totally liberated Arahant, they attain the full jhanas up to the Arahant jhanas.
But how can he say that the liberation by wisdom is 4 jhanas? What is his basis for saying that? Because we find for example, Venerable Sariputta is supposed to be liberated by wisdom. That is what the commentaries say. And in the Anupada Sutta, we found that Venerable Sariputta has attained all the 4 rupa jhanas, all the 4 arupas, and plus cessation of perception and feeling. So he is still liberated by wisdom. So what he says has no basis. If one of you is interested, I have written about this liberation by mind and liberation by wisdom in my book, Samatha and Vipassana. Yeah, but that opinion, I think, even is a lot of the Mahayanis won't support that, isn't it? Okay, shall we end here?